こんにちは。
こんにちは。
忙しいところお集まりいただきましてありがとうございます。私は益子陶芸美術館の大河内と申します。よろしくお願いいたします。マシュータイアスさんのギャラリートークを始めたいと思います。マットさん4月16日に来日されまして、ここの益子での滞在も残すところ10日になりました。あっという間にもう1ヶ月半以上が経っています。今日はこちらの会場の方に益子で制作をしてきたこちらの作品に加えて、その制作のプロセスですとか、あとマットさんが自身で撮られたお写真と書かれた詩なども合わせて展示をしております。で、会場にしているキャプションについてもマットさんに書き下ろしていただいたものになりますので、後ほどゆっくりとご覧ください。それでは、マットさんとあと通訳の松崎怜子さん、よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
Oh yes. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my exhibition. I'd just like to start by saying thank you to the people of Mashiko. Thank you to the museum and everyone who has helped to support the exhibition and the residency, particularly to Haruka, Chiaki and Makoto. Everyone at the museum has been incredibly friendly and supportive, so thank you everyone. Thank you. So I'll just start with a bit of background. I was asked to bring a pot from the UK and this is that. So this is a sort of work that I've been making in England. I think that what strikes me about the work are the horizontal and vertical lines, which I started making as I was throwing the pots, and I think kind of like a reaction to pots that I'm sometimes seeing which don't have sometimes very much expression in them, so it's just trying to kind of mindfully mark the clay. So I'm just trying to recognise that the clay is this sort of plastic material, and also that I'm imperfect. So as an imperfect human being, I'm not trying to make perfect works. So sometimes I think that the mark is a little bit too maybe angry or too direct. But also I've realised that it starts to reflect a personal journey that I've been on for a few years, which is like that the horizontal line represents time, a vertical line that represents more of a deeper engagement with life and experience. So when I get back to England, I might continue exploring that kind of work and use the metaphor to work through different types of lines and mark making. So my intentions before I came to Japan was to try to work with more low-fired glazes to produce slightly cooler pots. So sometimes we talk about pots being under-fired, which makes it sound like a technical fault. So that's not how I look at cooler pots. But sometimes those glazes are more matte and less shiny. And in coming to Mashiko, I was really interested in working with the landscape. So that is trying to include that in the material of the pot. That's also looking at the landscape and then trying to also work with the clay like it's a landscape. And of course I wanted to try wood firing, which I've not had many opportunities to do in the UK. So being playful was also a really important part of the work for me, because sometimes I have a tendency to take things too seriously. And also because when you work with clay, very often it's quite technically led, so you have to be accurate with what you do so that you don't fail to too much of an extreme. So I wasn't necessarily trying to create function directly, but the function of the pot is more of a byproduct of the outcome of the work. Mm-hmm. And I'm just trying to find expression in the clay and the material. Mm-hmm. So there were different strands to that playfulness. One of them was to start trying to work with small sculptures, and also trying to work quite quickly, because that also helps me understand how the clay behaves, and it stops me getting too stuck in the process. Thank you. So, for example, I wanted to make some flower bricks, so I just kind of thought I would model that on a small kiln, and again, just making it really quickly, not slab building it, just trying to dig it out of the clay with my hands, and just trying to work with the clay until I'm nearly breaking it, because I also like I talked earlier about liking cool pots, which strike me as being pots that feel old, and I kind of like that idea of broken clay, and I also think that signifies landscape and how landscape breaks down. So the other strand of that was working with back on the potter's wheel, making lots of small vessels. Because a lot of my recent time has been writing things like books or working on interpretation, so it's usually hitting keys with my fingers, and so you kind of lose a certain intelligence in your hands. So just trying to get some of that sensitivity back and strengthened a feel for the material. So suppose that there's this playing with form, and there's playing with hand making and the potter's wheel, and then also materials. So just trying to, I wanted to also work with slip because that's another expression of clay. But I wanted to use the slip after the biscuit firing, and I didn't want that to come off the pot. So we reduced the biscuit firing temperature. And also I just kind of experimented with adding borax to the slip to try and make the slip a bit more sticky. That was my hope. But I found that the borax in Japan behaves slightly differently to borax in the UK. So an interesting experiment, but one that kind of like, it stopped after the first firing. And also just kind of thinking about the first pot where I was talking about trying to do things in more depth. I kind of tried to focus on one or two clay bodies rather than lots of them. And I really like the Kitagoya clay, I like the colour, I like the texture, I like the way it works. And it was also really friendly in many respects. The only thing that I found the clay didn't like was being rushed in the drying process. So again, that's kind of the great thing about pottery, is it has its own, it's independent, I think, as a material. It's got its own pace and life. So I was thinking about landscape in different ways, thinking about, I guess, the landscape as a plate, and then kind of making this little maquette to try and get a sense of how Mashiko feels, because obviously as you look around there's a lot of hills, and perhaps they're so easy to take for granted, but it's kind of like that sense of how that places you in the landscape as a viewer, and in relationship to the hills we're really quite tiny, aren't we? And the mountains last for an awful long time, so it's just trying to create just quickly in small objects a bit of a sense of weight and a presence to them. And then there's that question of, if you have these different lines of investigation, how do you bring them together so it doesn't look like you've just got these random pieces of work? Mm-hmm. So then as I'm getting back into throwing, I'm trying to kind of think how I can bring landscape back into the thrown form. And initially that was sort of decorating landscape type pictures onto, I guess, a tea bowl sort of form, which looked really forced and unnatural and didn't work very well. So then one of the other ways that I was looking at that was to, for example, with that piece there, starting to cut the form and then reshape it. But again, that feels quite an aggressive way to deal with the clay and unnatural. So again, it didn't feel right for me and it didn't feel right for the clay. And then one of the other things that I was looking at was using Kitagoya clay in the ash glaze. So obviously Mashiko's famous for its ash glaze, but it's like, okay, I'm working with Kitagoya in the body, how can you work with that clay in the glaze? So that was this glaze here and that glaze over there. So I'm quite liking this outcome because it sort of looks like the clay and it's a little bit on the cooler side. We were hoping that the glaze with more ash in would work, but essentially you can see from that pot that the firings were quite problematic. So maybe 20% of the glaze came out well, and then the other results were mixed. So again, it's like in a very short period of time, just having to make decisions about what you continue with. And Haruka developed some further glaze tests which stabilized the glaze, but essentially it just started to look like Mashiko ash glaze. So why not use Mashiko ash glaze for that? The other playful aspect of the work that I was interested in was Rokuro. And so I was interested in Enma at the temple and that kind of long association that Mashiko has with the temple. I like the idea of the king of the netherworld sorting souls, and I thought that in Mashiko there are a lot of potters, so that Emma, well, Rukuro is essentially an assistant to Emma for sorting the souls of potters. And also I really wanted to make an incense burner. So I was hoping to do a lot more with that line of work, but again, I realised I had to focus down. And then this side of the exhibition, we're just sort of looking at some of the technical aspects of a residency and all of that knowledge and support that the technician brings into it, which helps to underpin the practice. So there's just some examples of triaxial glaze blends, some of the line blends that we were doing, and then examples of some of the work. So we've got some pots there by Haruka, who's the current technician, and Koki, who was the previous technician to that, both of whom are here today. So we're not necessarily looking at the work in the order it was created, but I'll talk to the different elements. So I'm going to start here actually. These are pieces that develop from the little pot on that side of the room, and I was kind of thinking these as representations of the hills. So you kind of have that sense that the form talks to being landscapes. So they sort of work in a multiple. They're decorated with a Kitagoya glaze. And also quite soon I start adding materials back into the clay just to make it a bit kind of more rugged. And you can kind of see how after I've thrown it, I kind of continue just trying to push the clay until it nearly collapses. And after the first wood firing, I was looking at how Koki was using rice husks on the inside of the bowls that he was making. And then that made me think, I think I was thinking of also fire cord decoration after that. So I started also adding rice husk into the clay in the hope that it would create...
Rice
husk.
Rice husk.
So I was kind of hoping that would create space in the clay body. And also that started bringing a nice texture in when turning it. So I guess the pots are, they embody as much landscape as I can bring into it, and they're also a representation of it. And again, with the glazing, that kind of idea of trying to reflect peaks and mountains. And then I think it also made sense to, in terms of, as I was starting to work with more rice husk, the way that the texture changed on the pot made it obvious to me that I needed to bring the ash glaze into this as well, the Mashiko ash. And just kind of like, I experimented with a few bowls as well. So again, because of the way that the rice is incorporated into the clay, you kind of get this nice texture. I find it nice with the turning. So you sort of get this, again, this sort of two aspects to the pieces of work. And at the same time, I'm still doing, I guess, more traditional pots for use. These were some of the latter pieces. And so I think we haven't talked about risk, and I like this idea of risk when you're making pots, that you don't necessarily know what the outcome is and that it might fail. And for me, that stops the work from getting tired or me being bored with doing it. So these large bowls grew out of the small bowls from the first round, and those are over there. Those little ones were like
at the same time?
They were from the first kiln, this was from the second kiln. So in the way that these were glazed and slipped, I was still trying to think about landscape, but the scale of the landscape changed. And I don't consider myself to be a painter, but I also wanted to try and work with cobalt and decoration. And so I was doing this under the slip, and then slipping and glazing at the same time to try just to get a bit more integration between those different surfaces. And I did hope that by using ochre with the cobalt that I'd be able to get the cobalt to bleed more into, I think I said a few days ago, like the ghost of a pattern rather than it being obvious. So this is a little bit brighter than I was expecting, but I'm still pleased with the results. And I think this is actually the last or the next to last that I decorated, and I dropped it into the slip, so I kind of like the mess that it made. So this piece here is, again, one of the latter pieces, and I think most of the works are experiments really than being anything that's final. And again, it really has quite a lot of rice husk in there as well. So I'm going for texture. I'm sort of thinking about it as landscape, and I would probably just keep developing this idea for a little while. And then also just that idea of if you're making a bowl, with that one over there with the drop rim, and then it's like if you're trying to make something that's functional, how far can you push it until it breaks and it's no longer functional? So just sort of like trying to push those rims or folding them over and creating some cracks. Does it work? Doesn't it work? There's a bit of a tension maybe. And then in the middle, they are some of the last pots that are made, and they were thrown on the kick wheel. So again, the kick wheel is kind of interesting because it's lurking in the corner of the studio, and it's got that obvious connection to the Leach Pottery. And also it's sort of, you have to slow your making down a little bit, and for me be a little bit more thoughtful about what you're doing. And I kind of thought as I was getting to the end, I was kind of getting a bit more warmed up and into the making. And before I came to Japan, I didn't have any intention of making tea bowls, because I think that's kind of possibly a difficult space to get into because it's a complex object. So my first one that I was happy with is just over on that side there. And then I decided I just needed to make a few more to try and get the feel for it. So I'm sure there are people who've said this better than I'm about to say it. But in some of those tests and experiments I was doing with the earlier pieces, trying to kind of look at them as landscapes, it also seemed quite obvious to start looking at the Chuan, because it's essentially a sculpture. You can look at it as a piece of sculpture. And when we talk about domestic pots, we talk about creating an internal space that's got some kind of practical application, and then the outside shape follows that. Whereas with the Chuan, it kind of feels like there's these two different surfaces in tension that you're trying to resolve to create one holistic piece. Yeah, so you have an internal space and an external space, which are separate and connected.
But as one.
But yeah. Sake cups. Again, I really like the idea of making small objects that are powerful. So I'm not saying that what I've made are powerful objects, but I like the idea of trying to create small pieces of work with a strong spirit. So that kind of also sent me in the direction of making sake cups, which I like to do anyway, so that was a very good excuse. And then Mr. Yokibori showed me a piece by Kamada, which had been fired upside down, and so the spiked pot over there was from the first kiln. So Haruka was saying you need to put 3 prongs on that pot, and I kind of thought it sounds right, and I agreed, but at the same time I just wanted to try it with one. So again, it's just that idea of risk, and you have to find out through making your own mistakes sometimes, despite how good the advice is. And also by this stage I'm still mixing rice into the clay, and then I'm finding that when that burns away, it leaves a nice little shadow under the ash glaze. Or probably all of them, yeah, yes.
このくいの実ととっくりのグループは全部そうだそうですね。
So it's sort of like a mini embodiment of the larger pieces. It's that distilling of, I guess, experimental landscape works, and then trying to take that back into more of a practical application. And again, with these pieces, just a little bit of play with cobalt, and it's that same kind of underneath the slip, and then just fingers crossed and see what happens. And then down the rest of the side we have kind of the first sort of bowls and tea beakers that I was making for the first kiln. And that was also the experimental slip. So I did get some results from that I liked, but it just wasn't quite consistent enough to keep using. And then and when I was looking at these in my imagination, I was almost kind of like seeing this as like a 360-degree wraparound of a horizon. And then that is how I got to those bowls over there, sort of thinking of like if I was stood in the middle of here and then I'm looking at flowers or trees. So that's kind of how that design over there developed from these. And then just over at the end we have some You Know Me, which I think is quite a popular form in the UK. And it's sort of trying to take some of the material of the Kittigoya clay and some of the ash that I've been using over here, and just toning down the decorative techniques, but again, sort of how do you apply something from that kind of work into this sort of work. And then while I was here, I was also, and I'm still taking photographs and writing short poems. So this is something that I've been doing for probably as long as clay, which is, I guess, over 25 years or so now. So I kind of think that one of the important ideas that Bernard Leach talks about, and he's also repeating it from the 19th century, from people like William Morris and Ruskin, is that idea of using head, heart and hand. Head, heart and hand. So maybe 25, 30 years ago I had more of a job that was just an office job at the time. So like through pottery it allowed me to change my occupation and the things that I could do. And that idea that if you use your hand, your head, you can be intellectualizing about things. Your heart is like your artistic instinct, and your hands is that practical experience of the world. So then by doing all these different types of practice, I'm trying to unify these elements and then hopefully have a fuller human experience. So the mediums and the materials are separate, but for me it kind of hopefully leads to some sort of unification.
マットさんありがとうございました。ここからは私工房担当の岩見が担当させていただきます。ここから質疑応答のコーナーになりますので、何かご質問ある方いらっしゃいましたらお願いいたします。
マットさん今回で日本は2回目ですかね。前回、益子にも滞在されて、今回来られて、なんかその2年間の間にこんなものを作りたいっていうそういうアイデアをこう考えて、その結果としてこう作られた集大成みたいなものなのか、あるいは来てからこの2ヶ月、なんですかね、来てからいろんな方に会われて、そうなんですか、このとっくりの話もさっき伺いましたけども、滞在中にこうアイデアを自分でこう考えながら作っていったのか、そのあたりのプロセスをちょっとお聞きしたいなと思うんですけども。
So when you came here 2 years ago, during 2 years until this time you come to Japan, did you think about what you are going to make in Mashiko, or did you plan what you are going to make in Mashiko? Or after you came to Mashiko second time, something happened in you and then you decide what to make?
So I think like after my first trip to Japan, there was possibly like, I found the experience really friendly. So like for me, I would say there was more of an attitude, maybe an attitudinal change when I went back to England of, okay, that's a really nice experience, and how can I maybe bring more of that kind of attitude to my life in England. And then in terms of before I came to Japan, I just made the decision to use the wood kiln, and I wasn't going to, because I think there's a lot of benefit in using a gas firing and getting more firings through and getting the work back more accurately. But some of the things for my own personal development that I've been trying to do is give up control of things. So like by using the wood kiln, you're kind of opening yourself up to more variation in the outcome, and I think trying to be more accepting of that. So I was hoping to make those kind of cooler pots when I came here, and then quickly realised I wasn't necessarily making the right decisions with the firing, or had chosen the right kind of firing at the right time to do that. But the pots that came out were hotter, and I really like the outcome. So I think it's kind of been open. I think you have to be open to the residency as opposed to trying to impose things. Otherwise, you just make what you always get. If you do what you always do, you get what you've always got. Good question.
Thank you very
ありがとう
much.
ございます。では他に質問のある方いらっしゃいませんか？
前回マットさんのオープンスタジオの時にもみ殻と砂をこう入れ込んでいる時にハッピーアクシデントが起きたらいいよねっていう感じで言われてたんですけど、今回実際やってみてハッピーアクシデントは起こったのでしょうか？
When you were having open studio, you were mixing rice husk and then sand in the clay, and then you are hoping to some happy accident happened. Did it really happen? Did happy accident really happen?
I would say that in one sense there's an intention with the work in the room, and then also there's that interaction with the clay and the firing, and so if the work came out exactly how I intended, it might not actually be very lively. So it's that kind of, in the past I've looked at my work and not liked the expression of myself in the work. It's become too tight or too repetitive. So I am happy with the results, which 5 or 10 years ago I wouldn't necessarily be happy with anything. So it's kind of like, so to me it's like it's a good outcome. And again, it's like trying to give up a little bit of control to let other things express themselves. Thank you.
今、マシューさんのいろいろ焼き物に対するアプローチの仕方、すごく参考になりました。どうもありがとうございます。
He likes the way you approaches to making pots or approach to clay.
特にずっと話聞いてて、益子の景色、そういうものをすごくその自分のデザインとかそういうものに取り入れたっていうんですけども、益子の自然ってちょうど今季節的にいい季節ですよね。どういうところになんかインスピレーションがあったんですかね。例えばイギリスの風景も結構自然あると思うんですけども、どういうその違いがあるんでしょうか。
So you were saying that you wanted to express the landscape you've seen on your part. He thinks that there are so many beautiful views, landscapes in England too. What's the difference between England and here?
There's two different answers to that. So there's that kind of there's the difference of the visual and geological elements of the landscape. Obviously what it looks like and how rich the landscape is here, how quickly it changes. What I find interesting about Mashiko is it's kind of like the way that the hills, with all the different hills and then these little plains and valleys, you kind of feel like you're going through a lot of magical different worlds. So there's that way of, there's you in the landscape as probably a lot of other people perceive it. And then I think what you're trying to get really in the landscape is not to, like a photograph is really representation, it's representation of the landscape, but it doesn't, it's trying to like, how do you convey, it's about how the landscape makes you feel as well. So it's like, I think it's like trying to convey a feeling, which is sort of, once you start trying to define that, it loses its essence. So there's two ways you'd read a landscape, I think, literally, and then kind of on an emotional or spiritual level, which is sort of a bit beyond, difficult to describe. Well, on the one hand, like I've been reading about Japan and various texts and descriptions for 20 or 25, nearly 30 years. But on the other, when I was in Japan and traveling through it last time, I felt, it's going to sound daft, I felt at home. I felt like I'd been to Japan before. So like Japan felt familiar. And so, you know, for example, I could be in, I think I was in Kyoto, and I just had this sense that I needed to go through, wander through these streets in a particular direction, and found myself at a temple. I don't think there's any signposting for it, but it's just like I felt it kind of felt quite normal to be there and go to that place. So Japan just feels really familiar. I can't explain why. Thank you.
アーティスト・イン・レジデンスの中にも、いろいろなジャンルがある中で、陶芸ということで、その陶器を作るには土を使わないといけないという、その土地の固有性とかがそのアーティスト・イン・レジデンスの中で、その陶芸のアーティスト・イン・レジデンスだと、一つの特徴かなというふうに思うんですけれども、その実際にアーティスト・イン・レジデンスで益子に滞在してみて、その陶芸として、陶芸の中でのアーティスト・イン・レジデンスについてどういうふうに思われたのかちょっとお伺いできればというふうに思います。So I think there are a lot of journals in artists in residence, and so I was wondering, like as a pottery, like you came to Mashiko for attending the artist in residence, and I'd like to ask, what is kind of like uniqueness of attending the artist in residence in pottery field?
This one in particular, it's my first artist in residence. On the flip side of the coin, I'm sometimes involved with delivering the residences in the UK. I don't know, I think possibly what's unique about this residency is like the collegial atmosphere of the museum, and then you kind of have a town which, you know, I've only been here maybe 8 weeks or 9 weeks in total, so it's like you just get this very quick snapshot. So like as an outsider from the West, Mashiko has this sort of a narrative of being a potter's town. Mashiko has this kind of these different threads going through it of traditional pottery, studio pottery, the artist potter, and this relationship with materials and glazes and process. So from a Western perspective, the narratives that I know of, Mashiko is kind of has this unique feel to it. But my sense as well from people who live here is also that Mashiko is quite unique in the infrastructure of pottery in Japan. So I think just being able to do a residence in that context is unique in itself, because there possibly isn't anywhere quite like Mashiko. It's kind of like a supportive family, caring. Hamada and the relationship with Leach, then the Mashiko is sometimes, again, I don't want to be somebody who's speaking on behalf of everybody in the West, but there's this kind of, I think sometimes it could be more famous than some of the 6 famous kiln sites because of how the town's evolved, and I think what it represents to people's imagination.
So that's also from Mashiko people. We have, you think we have that kind of recognition?
So I would say that, yeah, there's that perception in the West, and then talking to people in Mashiko, there's kind of that acknowledgement as well that it's sort of a unique place where potters can settle. There's lots of different genres of pottery, and possibly it's a place where people can reimagine themselves. So it's sort of, as I understand, when Shoji Hamada came to Mashiko, he was inspired by Ditchling and that idea of an arts and crafts community. So again, I don't know enough, but my general sense about Mashiko is that it's quite broad and it has depth. but you have to spend time with it for it to reveal itself. And I've not been here very long, but I feel that there's a lot under the surface. Thank you.
これまでリーチポタリーでマット・フォスターさんとかルドフ・ウィスさんとか、ずっと前ですとジャック・ドバティさんとかといういろんな陶芸家がおられましたけれども、そういう彼らとはこの益子に来る前に何か情報の共有とかそういうのはありましたかという質問と、あと益子のこの春の陶器市のご覧になったと思うんですけれども、ああいう大きなイベントの印象、ちょっとカオスな感じなんですけども、その印象とか、もうちょっとこういうことがあったらもっといいんじゃないかとか、そういう、マットさんのちょっとこう外から見たご意見とかそういうのがあれば聞きたいです。
He has two questions. One is, there has been so many people from Leach Pottery to come to this program in Mashiko, like Jack Doherty, Matthew Foster. Many people are coming from Leach Pottery. Have you exchanged information of Mashiko, or before you came here? Did you talk about Mashiko, or did you get information from them?
Not really. I would say I was kind of following Matt's residency here, and as probably a lot of people in this room know, Matt made a lot of work, and so Matt was also, I think, looking at kahiki glazes, which is that sort of slip with again a cooler glaze. So that was kind of like reigniting my interest in coming here and maybe exploring that kind of aesthetic. But I try not to look too closely at how other potters engage, say, with a residency in Mashiko, because I'm trying to come here and understand it on my own terms. And again, it's kind of like if I did research about things like the geography of the area and looking at things like shrines and temples and trying to understand some of the history of Mashiko, whether that's kind of like social or economic. So I'm interested in things like that. But then from an artist practice point of view, again, it's like trying to be open to the process and not come with too much of a plan, because otherwise I'll lose that spontaneity.
The second question from Tomo-san. How was the pottery fair in Mashiko? It's kind of chaotic. What is your impression? What was your impression of pottery fair, and from a person from West? What we can do better?
That's perhaps the most difficult question. So I would say, first of all, like the scale of it was massively different to anything I'd experienced in England. And I've only been to pottery fairs in England. And maybe in England they might have up to 50 to 100 exhibitors.
50 to
100, maybe. But again, say 10, 15 years ago, there were times when I was a full-time potter, so I would do research on that, and I would kind of be looking at audiences and markets. And I also went to the fair at Kasama, so that it's almost like
Kasama.
two, I wouldn't say night and day, but two really different experiences. So there's something kind of organic and nice about the chaos of the Mashiko fair, and I mean chaos in a nice way. But it's kind of like, for me, it was there's sensory overload. So it's like if I'm looking at this as an outsider without any experience, like one of the things that I was thinking is, you know, would you look at blocking off the main high street through the town during the daytime, so it's more pedestrianised, and maybe you would put chairs there so there's like a dwell time and somewhere for people to rest, because there isn't really this sense of anywhere for people to stop and rest. I was kind of, sorry, this is like me wearing a different hat. I was kind of interested in, you've got these high visitor numbers, but then I didn't get any sense that there was data on the spend per head. So I would be thinking about what's the average spend, what does the average customer look like, and then how you could potentially, you might want to reduce the footfall but increase the spend per head. And then also quite a lot of potters where I felt, this is just my opinion and it's not meant to be, what's the word, causing a hoo-ha, but it's sort of like the pricing of a lot of work was low, I felt, especially compared to the West. And so I was kind of quite concerned for the welfare of some potters and how to make that business more sustainable. And it felt like a lot of potters were competing against each other, and my feeling was that the competition isn't other potters, but it's industry, or it's things in contemporary culture that people want to escape from and enjoy handmade. So I kind of felt that there were particular narratives that could potentially be changed or adapted to maybe just enhance what is, again, probably really an incredible fair, and a lot of people in the West don't know about it. So I noticed a few visitors from the West. So yeah, I think it's an amazing fair, and I can't imagine how complicated it must be to organise and the amount of effort that goes into it. But maybe there's a few little tweaks which could, sort of change the dynamics of it slightly. But what do I know? My ignorance is infinite.
それではこれで一旦締めさせていただきます。本日はギャラリートークご参加いただきましてありがとうございました。
いいアプローチしてるんやろ。だから益子に来る若者が最初にこういう気持ちでアプローチしていったら結構まだね面白いの作れるんじゃないかと思うんだけどね。だからそういう意味ですごく参考になったと、このプロセスをね。
どれも素敵で、益子で生まれ育ったので、やっぱりこういうものを使って食事したりしたら楽しいだろうな。益子のものなんだけどイギリスとのつながりも感じられて、お話の作品もすごく良かったです。
すごい益子の、益子にマットさんが来られて、その滞在中やられてきたことですとか、そのコミュニティの方たちとの触れ合いとかっていうところも実際にお伺いできたので、とても楽しく思いました。ありがとうございます。